By setting up our document using the fluid grid layout that we used in the previous tutorial, we see this default div with the placeholder textual content inside it. Even though we're looking at the desktop viewport here, in fact I'll just click up here as well to expand so we can see it all. If we click to view this on a mobile, you'll see the exact same div, but it's resized accordingly to span across 5 columns. And then by looking at the tablet view, we see it across 8 columns. I'll go back to my desktop view now, referencing what we saw in an earlier tutorial when we named the AP div tags. You can see here, once you click inside this default div, the ID is automatically set to div layout div 1. And you'll see it duplicated in the property inspector next to ID, layout div number 1 there. Now this is only one div. If you want to make the process of adding further divs to this page much more smooth and certainly easier, you can delete this div by selecting it here and hitting the delete key. We're now left with the wrapper div and its 2 classes, grid container and clearfix. Okay, we now have our wrapper container on screen with no junk text in it. So now, making sure you're still inside this wrapper container, go to layout options. Now I have it across the top here. Yours might be located elsewhere, possibly in one of the panels at the right hand side. Anyway, as I say, I've got mine here, but wherever yours is, you need to be looking at the layout option regardless of how your Dreamweaver is set up. So here in your layout option, go to the second object, insert fluid grid layout div tag. And once selected, this dialog box opens up. Insert fluid grid layout div tag with only 2 options, but they are extremely important. Probably the first thing you've noticed is you'll see the ID field here has defaulted to layout div 1, but of course you can rename this appropriately for your design. For my design, I'll call it header, seeing as it's going to be for the page header, and just underneath there's a rather innocuous looking checkbox, checked by default, named as Start New Row. And what we do here with our choice is particularly relevant to what will occur on the page. In actual fact, there are 2 types of fluid grid layout div. Type number 1 is a fluid grid layout div that stretches completely across the screen width layout. And type 2 is a fluid grid layout div that only partially stretches across the screen's width and determined by you. Now for the moment I'm going to leave the checkbox active, and as a result what we'll get is a div that is a block element that has a width of 100%. i.e. right across our screen. So I'll OK this, and the resulting div is the aforementioned block element div with a 100% block width. And it also takes on some dummy text we can of course remove later. Now to show how it does span 100% across our screen, click the options below to see it displayed across multiple screen sizes. There's the tablet view at 100% and there's the phone view at 100%. I'll go back to the desktop and we'll add another div. And of course we want it to follow our header div, so place your cursor inside at the end of the filler text in the first header div, and to make sure I've got it, I'll select it on the tag selector just above the properties panel there. And my next step is to simply click on the Insert Fluid Grid Layout Div tag again from the insert area. And in my resulting dialog now, I'm going to name this div Content Area Number 1. This time I'm going to uncheck the checkbox, Start New Row checkbox, and click OK. From this point, you might feel the inserted Content Area Number 1 div just created is displaying differently to our header div. Well, you'd be right. It's slightly indented and spills out on the right a little as well. We'll fix this in a moment. Now, in fact, it's intentionally indented like this so we can resize it to fit a user-defined grid width. If we want it to cover half the layout, for example, we'd resize it to cover only 50% of our columns. Consequently, if we did size it at 50%, on this same row that this is located, we can add another div to share the width. Therefore, you can see how we can build up content on the left within this div and separate content on the right in another div. So let's resize this Content Area Number 1 div to cover half of our screen. No doubt you'll remember in an earlier tutorial, I set the number of columns to 12 to enable me to easily divide the content area into half or thirds or quarters. If it was set to half, this would be 50%, therefore sharing 6 of the columns. If it was a third, each area would be 33%, sharing 4 columns each, out of our total 12. And of course, if we wanted it into quarters, i.e. 25%, we would have 4 content areas spread across 3 separate columns each. Right, for your convenience, I'm just going to pause this tutorial and we'll pick up again in the next tutorial.